They laughed because she arrived sweaty to work, until a customer asked to see where she lived. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Another day, another hour on foot. Rachel wiped her forehead with a piece of cloth torn from an old t-shirt, her blouse sticking uncomfortably to her back as beads of sweat traced paths down her spine. Her shoes, barely holding together after years of constant wear, made a flapping sound against the hot Los Angeles pavement as she walked. One more step, one more breath, one more shift to make it through. The morning sun was relentless, beating down on her shoulders as she trudged through the streets of downtown. All around her, cars zoomed past, their occupants comfortably sheltered from the heat in air-conditioned interiors. She kept her eyes fixed on the sidewalk, counting the cracks beneath her feet, anything to distract from the physical discomfort that had become her daily companion. By the time she reached Moonbeam Cafe, her uniform shirt was dark with perspiration, her face glistening with sweat. She slipped in through the back door, hoping to cool down before anyone noticed her arrival. The kitchen's industrial fan offered momentary relief as she stood beneath it, eyes closed, savoring the brief respite. "Morning," she said softly, mustering a smile as she always did, despite knowing what would follow. The other servers looked up from their pre-shift preparations, exchanging glances before Wendell, the shift supervisor, wrinkled his nose dramatically. "Here comes the storm," he whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the break room. She heard it, of course, she always did. After 6 months at Moonbeam, Rachel had grown accustomed to their jokes, their sideways glances, their visible discomfort when she was assigned to work beside them. She tried to make herself small, invisible, focusing on retrieving her apron from her locker and tying it with practiced efficiency. "If they knew why I walk," she thought, sliding her order pad into her apron pocket, "they'd choke on their fancy cappuccinos." Her home wasn't really a home at all. It was a ramshackle structure cobbled together from discarded materials, situated precariously on an empty lot behind the city landfill. No electricity, no running water, just a roof that leaked when it rained, and walls that shuddered when the wind blew too hard. But it was shelter, the only shelter she could provide for herself and her 2 grandchildren after their apartment building had been condemned and converted into luxury condominiums they couldn't possibly afford. Every night she tucked Lily and Marcus into their makeshift beds, just foam padding covered with the cleanest blankets she could find, and kissed their foreheads with a promise. "Grandma's going to make things better, you'll see." But every morning, as she walked the 4 miles to work because bus fare would mean less food for the children, the streets of Los Angeles reminded her of how far she was from better, how the city gleamed with wealth and opportunity, for some while others like her struggled to maintain even the most basic dignity. Rachel slipped out of the break room and onto the cafe floor, clipboard in hand, ready to set up her section, before the morning rush began. As she arranged sugar packets and checked salt shakers, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored wall behind the bar. Her hair, though neatly combed, was still damp at the temples. Her uniform, though clean, she washed it by hand each night, bore the wrinkles and wear of fabric that had been stretched beyond its intended lifespan. "Table 2 needs water," Wendell called out, unnecessarily loud. "And maybe bring them." "A towel too, Rachel. You're dripping all over the place." More snickers. Rachel straightened her shoulders and grabbed a water pitcher. She wouldn't let them see her pain, couldn't afford to. This job, with its meager wages and occasional tips, was all that stood between her grandchildren and true homelessness. That day, a man sat at table 4. He was perhaps in his early 40s, dressed simply but in clothes that spoke of comfort rather than necessity. His eyes followed her as she moved about the cafe, but not with the usual discomfort or disdain she'd grown accustomed to. There was something different in his gaze, something that looked almost like recognition, like curiosity. When she brought his bill, he smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you for the excellent service," he said, leaving a tip that made her breath catch. She wanted to tell him it was too much, that he'd made a mistake, but he was already heading for the door. As he left, he glanced back at her once more, a curious expression on his face. The next day, he returned, sitting once again in her section, and the day after that. By his third visit, Rachel had begun to wonder if she should be concerned, if perhaps he was watching her for some reason she couldn't fathom. As she cleared his empty plate on that third day, he spoke. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle. "This might sound strange, but would you mind showing me where you live?" Rachel froze, the plate suspended halfway to her tray. "Why?" she asked, her voice guarded, fingers tightening around the dish. "Because," he hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words, "I think I've seen you before, from a long time ago, and if you're who I think you are, I've been looking for you for years." She studied his face, the earnest eyes, the slight nervousness in his expression. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place it. After years of living on society's margins, Rachel had developed a keen sense for danger, for those who meant harm. This man triggered no such warnings. After her shift ended, she agreed to let him walk with her. They moved through the bustling streets, then into quieter neighborhoods, and finally along the dusty paths that led to the outskirts of the city. For almost an hour they walked, the man, who had introduced himself as Tayson, keeping a respectful distance, filling the journey with gentle conversation about the cafe, the weather, the changing face of Los Angeles. When the makeshift structure she called home came into view, Rachel felt the familiar surge of shame, the instinctive desire to apologize for her circumstances. But Tayson had fallen silent, his eyes fixed on the humble dwelling, on the carefully tended container garden that provided some of their food, on the clothesline where her grandchildren's school uniforms hung drying in the afternoon sun. "It's you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You used to feed me when I was hiding behind that old bakery on Wilshire, 20 years ago. You gave me warm bread when no one else would even look at me." Rachel stared at him, searching her memory. There had been so many people she'd tried to help over the years, so many faces that had come and gone. "You don't remember," he said, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. "You probably helped so many people, but I never forgot you. The woman who didn't ask questions, who just saw someone hungry and decided to do something about it." As he spoke, tears filled Rachel's eyes. She remembered now, not his specific face, which had been that of a teenage boy back then, but the bakery, the night shifts, the habit she'd developed of wrapping unsold bread in napkins and distributing it on her walk home. "I always said," he continued, "if I ever found you again, I'd change your life like you changed mine. That bread, your kindness, it kept me going until I could get on my feet. Now I own a construction company, nothing huge, but successful." Enough! Rachel hardly dared to believe what she was hearing. Life had taught her that miracles didn't happen to people like her, that kindness rarely circled back. "I don't expect anything," she said quietly. "What I did, anyone would have done the same." Jason shook his head. "No, they wouldn't, and most didn't. But tomorrow, if you'll let me, I want to show you what your kindness created. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you." Continuing. The next morning, Rachel woke before dawn, as she always did, preparing the children's lunches and walking them to the bus stop where they'd be picked up for school. She told them nothing of her encounter with Jason, unwilling to spark hope that might be extinguished. Life had disappointed her too many times to trust in promises, no matter how sincere they seemed in the moment. After seeing Lily and Marcus safely onto their bus, she began her long walk to the cafe, her mind wandering to the strange encounter of the previous day. Would Jason really return as he'd said he would? And if he did, what would it mean for her and the children? She was halfway to work when a car pulled alongside her, a modest sedan, neither new nor flashy. The window rolled down to reveal Jason's smiling face. "Good morning, Rachel. Can I give you a ride the rest of the way?" She hesitated only briefly before sliding into the passenger seat, grateful to be off her feet and out of the early morning heat. The car's interior was cool and clean, smelling faintly of pine air freshener. "I meant what I said yesterday," Jason said as he navigated through the morning traffic, "about wanting to help you. But I realize I was presumptuous, asking to see where you live without explaining myself properly. I hope I didn't frighten you." Rachel shook her head. "No, not frightened, just cautious. Life hasn't given me many reasons to trust sudden kindness. I understand that, he replied. If I were in your position, I'd feel the same way. So I'm not going to make grand promises or ask you to trust me right away. Instead, I'm going to show you something, and then we can talk about what might help you most. He drove past the cafe, continuing down familiar streets until they reached a neighborhood Rachel recognized, one of the older industrial areas that had been revitalized in recent years. Jason pulled into a parking lot beside a rectangular building with large windows and a sign that read, Second Chance Construction and Training. This is my company, he explained as he shut off the engine. We specialize in affordable housing renovations, but we also run a training program for people who need a fresh start, former inmates, recovering addicts, people who've experienced homelessness. We teach construction skills, provide certification, and help with job placement. Rachel followed him inside, immediately struck by the bustling energy of the place. One large room was set up as a workshop, where men and women of various ages practiced different construction techniques under the guidance of instructors. An adjacent office space housed desks and computers, where others were engaged in what appeared to be administrative or design work. "Morning, boss," called several voices as Jason led Rachel through the facility, introducing her to staff members and trainees alike. The genuine respect and affection with which they greeted him spoke volumes. In his office, a modest space with blueprints covering one wall and framed certificates on another, Jason gestured for Rachel to take a seat. "After you helped me?" "All those years ago," he began, "I managed to find a shelter that had a youth program. They helped me finish high school, then connected me with a construction apprenticeship. I worked my way up, saved everything I could, and eventually started this company with the specific goal of paying forward what was given to me." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "I've been thinking about expanding our services to include housing assistance for our trainees and employees. We've already purchased a small apartment building that we're renovating. The units will be ready next month, and I'd like you and your grandchildren to have one of them." Rachel stared at the folder he'd placed before her, unable to process what he was offering. "But I haven't trained with your program. I don't work for you." Jason smiled. "Not yet. But I also need an office manager, someone organized, reliable, and compassionate. Based on how you handle yourself at the cafe, even under difficult circumstances, I think you'd be perfect for the position. The salary is double what you're making now, plus benefits, and the apartment would be part of your compensation package." Rachel's hands trembled as she opened the folder to find employment papers and photos of a modest but clean apartment, with 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, and, luxury of luxuries, its own bathroom. "This can't be real," she whispered, her vision blurring with tears. "It is real," Jason assured her, "and you've earned it. Not just with what you did for me years ago, but with how hard you've worked to care for your grandchildren despite impossible circumstances." As they discussed the details of the position, Rachel felt something unfamiliar blossoming in her chest. Hope, yes, but also a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. By the time Jason drove her to the cafe for what would be her final shift, she had agreed to start her new position the following Monday. Walking into Moonbeam Cafe felt surreal, knowing it would be her last day, that she was about to step into a future so different from the life she'd been living. As she tied on her apron, Wendell approached, his customary smirk in place. "You're late," he said, though she wasn't, "and you're looking particularly dewy today." Rachel met his gaze steadily, no longer feeling the need to shrink away from his petty cruelty. "Actually, Wendell, I'm right on time, and after today you won't have to concern yourself with my appearance anymore. I'm giving my notice." The surprise on his face gave her a small, quiet satisfaction as she moved past him to begin her shift. She worked with renewed energy, treating each customer with the same care and attention she always had, even those who had previously joined in the mockery of her circumstances. As her shift neared its end, a familiar face appeared at the door, Mrs. Winters, an elderly woman who came every Thursday for a slice of lemon cake and a pot of Earl Grey tea. Rachel had always had a soft spot for her, making sure to reserve her favorite corner table and remembering exactly how she liked her tea prepared. "Rachel, dear," Mrs. Winters called, waving her over. "I was hoping to see you today. I've brought something for your grandchildren." From her large handbag, the older woman produced two small, carefully wrapped packages. "Just some books I thought they might enjoy. You mentioned how much they love to read." Touched by the gesture, Rachel accepted the gifts with heartfelt thanks, explaining that it was her last day at the cafe. "Oh, are you moving on to better things, I hope?" Mrs. Winters asked, genuine concern in her rheumy eyes. Rachel found herself sharing her story about Jason's recognition, his offer, the apartment that would soon be theirs. As she spoke, she noticed several of her co-workers slowing their tasks, clearly listening to her tale. "My dear, how wonderful," Mrs. Winters exclaimed, patting Rachel's hand. "Though I shall miss seeing you here, I couldn't be happier for you and those precious children." Later, as Rachel gathered her few belongings from her locker, Carrie, a newer server who had always been civil but distant, approached hesitantly. "Is it true," she asked, "about the construction company job and the apartment?" Rachel nodded, closing her locker for the final time. "I had no idea," Carrie continued, her voice low. "About where you were living, I mean, how you were walking all that way every day." She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "I'm sorry if I ever made things harder for you." It wasn't a full apology for the cafe's culture of mockery, but Rachel could see the genuine regret in the younger woman's eyes. "Thank you, Carrie, that means a lot." As Rachel left Moonbeam Cafe for the last time, she felt lighter somehow, as if she'd put down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for too long. Jason was waiting outside in his car to drive her home, a small kindness that symbolized the greater changes coming to her life. What will happen when Rachel starts her new job? Will the transition be as smooth as she hopes, or will new challenges arise? Keep watching to find out. The weekend passed in a blur of activity as Rachel and her grandchildren prepared for their move. When she told Lily and Marcus about the apartment, their reactions had been tellingly different. 12-year-old Lily had immediately burst into tears of relief, while 8-year-old Marcus had asked anxiously if they'd still be able to keep his collection of interesting rocks and bottle caps, revealing how even the youngest among them had adapted to the precariousness of their existence. "Of course you can keep your collection," Rachel had assured him, gathering him into a tight hug. "You'll have your own bedroom to display it properly." On Sunday evening, Jason arrived with a small moving truck and 3 young men from his training program. What few possessions the family owned, mostly clothes, school supplies, and the children's treasured books, were loaded quickly. Rachel took one last look at the makeshift home that had sheltered them through their darkest days, feeling a complex mixture of gratitude for its protection and relief to be leaving it behind. The apartment building was still being renovated, with work crews visible on several floors, but the unit designated for Rachel and her grandchildren was complete. Freshly painted walls in soft cream, simple but sturdy furniture, windows that opened to let in the spring breeze. As Lily and Marcus raced from room to room, exclaiming over features as basic as light switches and running water, Rachel stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed by the sudden change in their circumstances. "It's not fancy," Jason said, misinterpreting her silence as disappointment. "But it's clean and safe, and it's perfect," Rachel interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "More than perfect. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he replied simply, 20 years ago. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. For the first time in months, Rachel woke to an alarm clock rather than her internal sense of time. She showered in her own bathroom, a luxury that still felt unreal, and dressed in the business casual outfit Jason had suggested would be appropriate for her new position. The children, too, prepared for their day with unprecedented ease, no longer having to heat water over a camp stove to wash or use a bucket as a makeshift toilet. "You look beautiful, Grandma," Lily said, as they sat down to breakfast at their small kitchen table, another novelty, this eating together seated in proper chairs. "She always looks beautiful," Marcus added loyally, milk dribbling down his chin as he spoke around a mouthful of cereal. Rachel smiled, reaching over to wipe his face with a napkin. "Thank you both. Are you ready for your new school? Remember, Jason arranged for the company van to pick you up this morning." Both children nodded, though Rachel could see the nervousness beneath their excitement. The new apartment came with a new school district, one with better resources, but where they would know no one. "You'll be wonderful," she assured them. "Just be yourselves." After seeing them off to their new school, Rachel walked the 6 blocks to Second Chance Construction. The spring morning was pleasant, so unlike her previous trudges to the cafe. Without the physical exhaustion of a 4-mile walk, she found herself noticing details of the neighborhood: the corner bodega with its colorful fruit display, the small park where older residents sat enjoying the sunshine, the mural depicting the area's history that covered one building's side. At precisely 8:30, she pushed open the glass door of the construction company, ready to begin her new life. The reception area was busy with people coming and going, some in office attire, others in work clothes bearing the company logo. A young woman at the front desk looked up with a smile. "You must be Rachel. I'm Zena, one of the project coordinators. Jason asked me to show you around and help you get settled in your office." Office? The word itself was startling. Rachel had never had an office of her own. Zena led her through the building, introducing her to staff members, whose names Rachel struggled to remember all at once. There were estimators and project managers, apprentices and master craftspeople, accounting personnel and client liaisons, a complex ecosystem of roles that Rachel would need to understand to perform her own job effectively. Her office, when they reached it, was modest but well-equipped: a desk with a computer, filing cabinets, a comfortable chair, and a small window that looked out onto the street. On the desk sat a nameplate: Rachel Winters, Office Manager. "Jason will be in shortly to go over your responsibilities," Zena explained. "In the meantime, IT has set up your email account and system access. The passwords are in this envelope." She placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "The break room is down the hall if you need coffee, and my extension is 104 if you have any questions." Left alone, Rachel sat gingerly in her chair, running her fingers over the nameplate. Rachel Winters, Office Manager. Not Rachel the sweaty waitress, not Rachel the homeless grandmother. Rachel Winters, employed professional with an office and a nameplate. The magnitude of the change threatened to overwhelm her, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here because Jason believed she could do this job. Because somewhere in her past, she had shown kindness without expectation of return, and that kindness had circled back to her in a way she could never have imagined. Jason arrived a few minutes later, carrying a stack of folders and a tablet. "Good morning, Rachel. How are you settling in?" "It's a lot to take in," she admitted honestly, "but in the best possible way." He nodded understandingly. "It will take time to adjust, and there's a lot to learn. But we'll take it step by step." He set the materials down on her desk. "These are the current projects we're managing, and the employee files you'll need to familiarize yourself with. As office manager, you'll be the central point of communication between all departments, keeping track of schedules, managing office supplies and equipment, coordinating meetings, and generally making sure everything runs smoothly." The list of responsibilities was daunting, especially for someone whose recent work experience was limited to serving coffee and clearing tables. Seeing her expression, Jason added gently, "We don't expect you to master everything immediately. Zena has been covering most of these duties and will help train you, and I'm always available if you have questions." As the day progressed, Rachel began to understand the rhythm of the office, the flow of communication between various departments, the hierarchy of decision-making. She met with Zena for several hours, taking detailed notes as the younger woman explained filing systems, scheduling software, and office protocols. By late afternoon, Rachel's head was swimming with new information, but beneath the temporary confusion was a growing sense of capability. The organizational skills she'd developed, managing her family's survival on minimal resources, translated well to office management. Her attention to detail, honed by years of having to make every penny count, was an asset in tracking project expenses and schedules. When 5 p.m. arrived, she was surprised by how quickly the day had passed. She gathered her notes and the employee manual she'd been given to study, preparing to head home, home to the apartment with electricity and running water where her grandchildren were already waiting, having been dropped off by the company van. "How was your first day?" Jason asked, stopping by her office as she was putting on her jacket. "Overwhelming," she admitted with a small laugh, "but good. Really good." He smiled, clearly pleased. "It gets easier, I promise." "And Rachel—" He hesitated slightly. "I want you to know that this isn't charity. Yes, I wanted to help you because of our past connection, but this company genuinely needs someone with your organizational skills and people sense. You're going to be an asset here." His words warmed her as she made her way home through the early evening streets. For the first time in years, she was walking not out of necessity, but by choice, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement without exhaustion. When she reached the apartment, she found Lily and Marcus bubbling with stories about their new school. The computer lab where Marcus had played an educational game, the library where Lily had discovered they had copies of her favorite series, the cafeteria where they'd eaten hot lunches provided by the school's meal program. "And no one made fun of our clothes, Grandma," Lily said quietly, the relief in her voice revealing a concern she'd never verbalized before. Rachel felt a pang, realizing how much her grandchildren had been affected by their circumstances, how they too had endured silent indignities she hadn't fully perceived. She pulled them both into a tight embrace, promising herself that they would never again have to worry about such things. That night, after the children were asleep in their own beds, real beds with proper frames and new mattresses, Rachel sat in the small living room looking out at the city lights. The apartment was quiet save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of urban life filtering through the windows. She thought of her co-workers at the cafe, wondering if they would remember her in a week's time, if Wendell would find someone else to mock in her absence. She thought of Mrs. Winters, who had asked for her new address so she could send cards to the children, and she thought of Jason, whose life had intersected with hers twice now, once when he was the one in need, and now when she had been. Have you ever experienced a sudden change of fortune like Rachel's, or do you know someone who has? Share your story in the comments below. The following weeks brought a steady stream of new experiences as Rachel settled into her role at Second Chance. Construction. Each day presented fresh challenges, learning the specialized software used to track projects, understanding the construction terminology that peppered conversations around the office, navigating the interpersonal dynamics of a workplace far more complex than the cafe had been. There were moments of doubt, times when she questioned whether she was truly qualified for the position or merely the recipient of Jason's charitable impulse. But each small success, correctly processing a complicated order, resolving a scheduling conflict, finding a more efficient way to organize the filing system, built her confidence incrementally. The children, too, were blossoming in their new environment. Lily had joined the school choir and was making friends with girls who shared her interest in science and books. Marcus had been placed in a special program for children who needed extra support with reading, and his progress was already noticeable in the way he approached his homework, with growing confidence rather than frustration. 1 month into her new position, Rachel arrived at work to find an unfamiliar woman waiting outside her office, elegantly dressed, with a portfolio case tucked under one arm and an expression of barely contained impatience. "May I help you?" Rachel asked, unlocking her office door. "I certainly hope so," the woman replied crisply. "I have an appointment with Jason Hunter at 9, but his assistant just informed me he's been delayed at a job site. Apparently there's some issue with the permits for the West Side project." Rachel quickly checked Jason's schedule on her computer. "Yes, Ms. Powell, I see your appointment here. Jason called in earlier about the permit issue. He's asked if you could meet with our project manager instead, or if you'd prefer to reschedule for tomorrow." "Neither option is acceptable," Ms. Powell said, her tone sharpening. "I've rearranged my entire morning for this meeting. We're already behind schedule on finalizing the designs, and every day of delay costs my client money." Sensing an escalating situation, Rachel fell back on the conflict resolution skills she'd developed during years of customer service. "I understand your frustration, Ms. Powell. Let me see what I can do to resolve this for you." She placed a call to Jason, explaining the situation succinctly. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned back to the increasingly agitated Designer. Jason is about 20 minutes away. He suggests that I show you the updated blueprints for the project while you wait, so you can review the changes we've implemented based on your previous recommendations. Would that work for you? Ms. Powell seemed slightly mollified by this solution. I suppose that's acceptable. Do you have access to those files? I do, Rachel confirmed, pulling up the relevant documents on her computer. And if you'd like, some coffee while you review them. I just made a fresh pot. Cream and sugar. By the time Jason arrived, slightly breathless from rushing back to the office, Ms. Powell was seated comfortably at Rachel's desk, making notes on the blueprints, and sipping coffee from the company's best mug, which Rachel had discreetly retrieved from the break room. Vanessa, I'm so sorry about the delay, Jason began, but the designer waved away his apology. No harm done, your office manager has been most helpful. In fact, she pointed out a potential issue with the placement of the support beams that I hadn't considered. It's a small adjustment, but it will improve the flow of the space considerably. Jason glanced at Rachel with surprise and appreciation. Did she? Rachel has a good eye for practical details. After Jason escorted Ms. Powell to the conference room to continue their meeting, Rachel returned to her regular tasks, the small crisis successfully navigated. Later that afternoon, Jason stopped by her office. Vanessa Powell is one of our most demanding clients, he said without preamble. She's brilliant at what she does, but she's not known for her patience or flexibility. You handled her beautifully. Rachel shrugged, slightly embarrassed by the praise. It wasn't so different from dealing with an upset customer at the cafe. People just want to feel heard and valued. Maybe, Jason acknowledged, but not everyone has your instinct for it. That comment you made about the support beams, how did you know about that? I've been studying the project files in the evenings, Rachel admitted. There's so much I don't know about construction, and I thought understanding the projects better would help me do my job more effectively. I noticed the beams seem to interrupt the natural pathway through the room, based on the furniture layout in Ms. Powell's design notes. Jason's expression shifted to one of impressed surprise. You've been studying outside of work hours. Rachel, that's above and beyond. She smiled slightly. When you've been given a second chance like the one you've given me, you don't take it for granted. The conversation might have continued, but they were interrupted by the arrival of several trainees needing Jason's guidance on a technical issue. As he left her office, Rachel returned to processing invoices, a task that would once have seemed unbearably tedious, but now represented stability and purpose. That evening, as Rachel helped Lily with a science project while Marcus practiced, his reading aloud, a knock sounded at their apartment door. Puzzled, they rarely received visitors, Rachel opened it to find Zena standing in the hallway looking apologetic. I'm so sorry to bother you at home, the younger woman said, but we have a situation at the office. The server crashed and we can't access any of the project files. The IT team is working on it, but it means we don't have the updated schedule for tomorrow's deliveries. You mentioned you'd been keeping a backup copy on your laptop. Yes, of course, Rachel replied, ushering Zena inside. Let me get it for you. As she retrieved her laptop from the kitchen counter, Lily approached Zena with the natural curiosity of a 12-year-old. Are you from Grandma's work? Do you build houses too? Zena smiled, kneeling slightly to be at eye level with the girl. I work with your grandmother, yes. And while I don't physically build the houses, I help plan how they're built. Grandma says the company builds houses for people who need them, Marcus chimed in, looking up from his book. Like us. That's right, Zena confirmed. It's an important job helping people have safe, comfortable places to live, and your grandmother is very good at her part of it. The simple exchange, overheard as Rachel located the needed files, filled her with quiet pride. Her grandchildren were beginning to understand that their improved circumstances weren't just good fortune, but the result of meaningful work, both Jason's generosity and her own growing contribution to it. After Zena left with the files, Lily helped Rachel finish preparing dinner, a proper meal cooked on a real stove, with vegetables from the grocery store rather than scavenged from discarded produce. I want to work at a place like yours when I grow up, Lily declared as they set the table. Somewhere that helps people. Rachel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her granddaughter's forehead. You can do that and more, sweetheart. You can be anything you want to be. For the first time in years, those weren't empty words of encouragement, but a statement of genuine possibility. With a stable home, proper education, and freedom from the grinding stress of mere survival, her grandchildren's futures had expanded, from narrow paths of necessity to wide fields of potential. As they sat down to dinner together, Rachel offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the turn their lives had taken, not just for the material improvements, significant as they were, but for the restoration of hope itself, that most essential human need. Will Rachel's growing confidence at work lead to new opportunities? What challenges await as she continues to navigate her new life? The answers might surprise you. Autumn arrived in Los Angeles with subtle shifts, slightly cooler evenings, a different quality to the light that filtered through the apartment windows. Rachel had been at Second Chance Construction for 6 months now, long enough to have mastered most aspects of her position and to have become an integral part of the company's operations. Her desk, once bare save for office supplies and a nameplate, now held framed photos of Lily and Marcus, a small plant that Zena had given her, to brighten the space, and various mementos that marked her growing sense of belonging, a birthday card signed by the entire staff, a paperweight shaped like a house that one of the apprentices had crafted in the workshop, a coffee mug with "World's Most Organized Office Manager" printed on it. On this particular morning, Rachel arrived to find Jason waiting for her, a serious expression on his face that immediately triggered a flicker of her old anxiety. "Good morning," she said cautiously, unlocking her office. "Is everything all right?" "Please sit down," Jason said, gesturing to her chair. "There's something important we need to discuss." Rachel settled herself, hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. Despite the months of stability, old fears died hard. "The West Side project is complete," Jason continued, "and Vanessa Powell has recommended us for another development, a much larger one. The Harrington Foundation wants to convert an abandoned school building into transitional housing for families experiencing homelessness." Rachel relaxed slightly. This wasn't about her performance then. "It's a prestigious project," Jason explained, "and exactly the kind of work we've wanted to do since founding the company, but it's also significantly larger than anything we've handled before. We'd need to expand our staff, possibly restructure some departments." He paused, studying her face. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you. I'd like you to take on a new role, Community Liaison and Client Services Director." Rachel blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "You have a unique perspective that would be invaluable for this project," Jason explained. "You understand firsthand what these families need, not just in terms of physical shelter, but in support services, in dignity. And you've proven yourself exceptionally capable at managing complex situations and building relationships." "But I don't have any formal qualifications," Rachel protested. "No degree, no—" "Experience," Jason interrupted gently. "You have experience, the most relevant kind. And you've demonstrated every skill needed for this position in the 6 months you've been here." As Jason outlined the responsibilities of the new role, working directly with the Harrington Foundation, developing programs to support future residents, coordinating with social service agencies, Rachel felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. The position represented another leap forward, another expansion of possibilities she'd never imagined for herself. "You don't need to decide immediately," Jason assured her. "Take a few days to think about it. The salary increase would be substantial, of course, and—" "I don't need days," Rachel interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I want to do this. I want to help create something that might have changed my own family's path had it existed when we needed it." Jason's smile was warm with approval. "I hoped you'd say that. We'll make the announcement at tomorrow's staff meeting." That evening, as Rachel shared the news with Lily and Marcus over dinner, she was struck by how different their reactions were from just 6 months earlier. "Does this mean you'll be like a boss now?" Marcus asked, wide-eyed with admiration. "Sort of," Rachel laughed. "It means more responsibility and a chance to help families who are struggling the way we were." Lily, more perceptive at 12, reached across the table to squeeze her grandmother's hand. "You're going to be amazing at it, Grandma. You always took care of us even when it seemed impossible." Rachel's throat tightened with emotion. "We took care of each other," she corrected gently, "and now we'll have a chance to help others do the same." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Rachel stood on the small balcony of their apartment, gazing at the city lights. 6 months ago, she'd viewed Los Angeles primarily as a landscape of obstacles: too expensive buses, too distant jobs, too exclusive neighborhoods. Now she was beginning to see it differently, as a community of interconnected lives, of problems that could be addressed, of systems that could be improved. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Rachel transitioned to her new role. There were meetings with the Harrington Foundation, site visits to the old school building, interviews with potential new staff members. Each day brought fresh challenges that stretched her capabilities, but also deepened her confidence. 3 months into the project, Rachel stood in what had once been the school's gymnasium, now partitioned into the community spaces of the nearly completed transitional housing facility. Sunlight streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating freshly painted walls and sturdy furniture arranged in conversation groups. "It's really coming together," said a voice behind her. Rachel turned to find Vanessa Powell, the designer, whose initial impatience had given way to genuine respect over months of collaboration. "It is," Rachel agreed, running her hand along the back of a sofa. "The families will be able to move in next month." "Thanks largely to you," Vanessa noted. Jason says your input has been invaluable, especially the modifications to make the spaces more functional for families with children." Rachel smiled, thinking of the simple but significant changes she'd advocated for: laundry facilities on each floor rather than in the basement, play areas visible from the communal kitchens, storage solutions that accommodated the reality that even those with few possessions needed places to keep them. "I just thought about what would have helped us," she said simply. "What would have made the difference between merely surviving and actually beginning to rebuild?" As they walked through the facility, discussing final touches and move-in logistics, Rachel felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional pride. In helping to create this space, she was in some way reaching back through time to comfort her past self, to assure the frightened woman who had walked miles to work each day that not only would she survive, but she would eventually be part of, creating solutions for others facing similar struggles. That evening, as Rachel left the construction site, she decided to take a detour on her way home. The company car, another benefit of her new position, made such spontaneous journeys possible in a way they never had been before. She drove to her old neighborhood, parking a block away from the ramshackle structure that had once been their home. It was still there, though now surrounded by a chain-link fence marked with condemned notices. Soon it would be demolished, part of a neighborhood redevelopment plan that ironically might create more housing for people like her former self. Rachel sat in her car, studying the humble dwelling that had sheltered them through their darkest days. There was no nostalgia in her gaze. The memories of cold nights, inadequate sanitation, and constant anxiety were too raw for that. But there was a recognition of how far they had come, and how quickly life could change when opportunity and kindness intersected with perseverance. Her phone rang, interrupting her reverie. It was Lily, checking when she would be home for dinner, a simple, domestic question that highlighted the normalcy they now enjoyed. "I'm on my way," Rachel assured her. "Just had to make a quick stop." As she drove away, Rachel made a mental note to talk with Jason about Second Chance Construction, taking on smaller renovation projects in this neighborhood, creating affordable housing units to prevent other families from reaching the breaking point hers had. The completed transitional housing facility, named New Horizons by the Harrington Foundation, opened its doors to its first residents on a crisp December morning. Rachel stood in the lobby, greeting each family as they arrived, helping them navigate the intake process, showing them to their apartments. Among them was a young woman with 2 small children, her possessions contained in 3 plastic bags, her expression a familiar mixture of wariness and desperate hope. Rachel recognized herself in the woman's tense shoulders, in the protective way she kept her children close. "I'm Rachel," she said, extending her hand. "I'll be showing you to your apartment." "Maria," the woman replied hesitantly. "These are my kids, Jamie and Luis." As Rachel led them through the building, explaining the available services, community, spaces and security features, she noticed Maria's disbelief gradually giving way to cautious optimism. "All this, it's really for us?" Maria asked as Rachel opened the door to a simple but clean two-bedroom apartment with basic furnishings. "It is," Rachel confirmed. "This is a transitional program designed to give you space and support while you work toward permanent housing. There are job training programs, childcare, counseling services, whatever you need to get back on your feet." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think anyone cared about people like us, the way people look at you when you're down, like you're nothing." "I know," Rachel said softly. She hesitated, then added, "A year ago, my grandchildren and I were living in a makeshift shelter behind a landfill. I walked 4 miles to work every day because bus fare meant less food for the kids." Maria stared at her in disbelief. "But you're so put together, professional." Rachel smiled. "That's what a little stability and support can do, and that's what we want to provide here. Not just shelter, but a foundation you can build on. A second chance." Over the following weeks, Rachel divided her time between New Horizons and the construction company offices, developing a rhythm that allowed her to support both the residents and the programs designed to help them. She initiated a mentorship program that paired residents with volunteers from local businesses, created a resource library of information on housing assistance and job opportunities, and established weekly community meetings where residents could voice concerns and suggestions. Maria, the young mother who had reminded Rachel so much of herself, proved to be a natural leader among the residents, taking on volunteer responsibilities and helping newer arrivals navigate the transition. By February, she had secured part-time employment at a nearby daycare center that allowed her children to attend at a reduced rate. "I never thought I'd be working with kids," Maria confided to Rachel one afternoon as they sorted donations in the facility's storage room. "But seeing how Jamie and Luis respond to having a safe place, regular meals, it made me want to help other children have that security, even for just part of their day." Rachel nodded, understanding completely. "Sometimes our hardest experiences show us our purpose if we're given the chance to reflect on them from a place of safety." The mentorship program Rachel had developed at New Horizons soon caught the attention of other social service agencies in Los Angeles. In late March, she was invited to speak at a conference on innovative approaches to addressing homelessness. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of policymakers, non-profit leaders, and community advocates, Rachel felt an unexpected sense of belonging. "Transitional housing is not just about providing shelter," she said, her voice steady, despite her nerves. "It's about restoring dignity, rebuilding confidence, and recognizing the full humanity of people who have been made to feel invisible. The physical structure matters enormously, safe, clean spaces that offer privacy and comfort. But equally important are the support systems, the pathways to self-sufficiency, and the community connections that remind people they are valued and valuable." As she continued her presentation, illustrating her points with anonymized stories from New Horizons and data from their first quarter of operation, Rachel caught sight of Jason sitting in the back row. His proud smile gave her a final boost of confidence as she concluded her remarks and invited questions from the audience. The applause was generous, the questions thoughtful and engaged. After the session ended, several attendees approached Rachel with business cards and invitations to visit their organizations, to consult on their programs, to share her insights further. "You were brilliant," Jason said when the crowd had finally dispersed. "Absolutely brilliant." Rachel shook her head, still slightly overwhelmed by the response. "I just spoke from experience, both personal and professional." "Which is exactly why people listened," he pointed out. "You brought authenticity to a conversation that too often happens at a distance from the people most affected." As they walked together toward the parking area, Jason added casually, "The Harrington Foundation was impressed too. They're talking about funding a second facility, possibly in San Diego." Rachel stopped walking, turning to face him. And you'd be willing to take that on? To expand the company's reach that far? Jason's expression was thoughtful. It would be a significant step. But I've been thinking, what if we established New Horizons as its own non-profit entity? Connected to Second Chance Construction, certainly, but with its own mission, its own funding streams, its own leadership. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. You think I could lead something like that? Rachel asked finally. I think you already are, Jason replied simply. The question is whether you want to make it official, to grow it beyond what we've already built. Could she do it? Become the executive director of a non-profit organization, responsible not just for one facility, but potentially for many. 6 months ago, the very idea would have seemed ludicrous, a year ago unimaginable. But now, I'd need to think about it, she said slowly. Talk with Lily and Marcus, they've been through so much change already. Jason nodded understandingly. Of course, it's a family decision. But Rachel... He paused, making sure he had her full attention. Don't say no because you don't think you're qualified. Say no if it's not the right path for you, but not because of some imagined inadequacy. You've more than proven your capabilities. That night, after dinner, Rachel sat down with her grandchildren in their small living room. In the year since Jason had reappeared in her life, their circumstances had transformed so completely that sometimes it felt like a dream, one she still feared waking from. I've been offered an opportunity, she began, explaining Jason's proposal as simply as she could. It would mean more responsibility, but also more ability to help families like ours was. What do you two think? Lily, now 13 and increasingly thoughtful, considered the question seriously. Would we have to move again? Change schools? No, Rachel assured her. Our home is secure. This would just change my work. Would you be happy doing it? Marcus asked, his 8-year-old face solemn. Rachel smiled at the unexpectedly mature question. I think I would. It's challenging work, but meaningful, and I seem to be good at it. Then you should do it, Marcus declared with childish certainty. You always told us to do things we're good at. Lily nodded agreement. And maybe someday I could work there too when I'm older. We could help people together. The simple acceptance and support of her grandchildren settled something in Rachel's heart. The next morning, she called Jason to accept his proposal, setting in motion a new phase of transformation, not just for herself and her family, but potentially for countless others who would benefit from the expansion of New Horizons. What extraordinary challenges and rewards await Rachel as she embarks on this new chapter of her life? The conclusion to her remarkable journey will inspire you. 1 year later, Rachel stood in her office at the New Horizons headquarters, a modest suite in a renovated commercial building not far from the original transitional housing facility. The walls were adorned with framed photographs documenting the organization's growth, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Los Angeles facility, Rachel with the mayor at a community development forum, the groundbreaking for the San Diego location, a group shot of the first graduating families who had moved from transitional housing to permanent homes. A knock at her open door interrupted her reflection. Maria, now New Horizons Resident Services Coordinator, entered with a tablet in hand. The quarterly report is ready for your review, she said, her confidence a marked contrast to the hesitant woman who had arrived at the facility with her children and 3 plastic bags of possessions 18 months earlier. And the board. Meeting agenda is finalized. Rachel smiled, gesturing for Maria to sit. How are the new families settling in? Well, overall, Maria replied. There's a woman in Unit 14 who reminds me of myself when I arrived, terrified, expecting to be disappointed. I've been spending extra time with her, showing her it's real, that she can trust what we're offering. Rachel nodded, understanding perfectly. That's exactly what she needs. And your own housing situation, the apartment is working out. Maria's face brightened. It's perfect. The kids love having their own rooms, and being within walking distance of the facility makes my schedule so much more manageable. I've even started taking those online courses we talked about, working toward my associate's degree in early childhood education. After Maria left, Rachel turned to the window, looking out at the city that had once seemed so hostile to her and her grandchildren. Los Angeles was still a place of stark contrasts and systemic challenges, but she now saw it differently, as a community where change was possible, where compassion could be organized into action, where personal transformation could ripple outward to affect others. The board meeting that afternoon was focused on expansion plans, not just new facilities but new services, new partnerships with other organizations addressing different aspects of homelessness and poverty. As executive director, Rachel led the discussion with a confidence that still occasionally surprised her, though others had come to take it for granted. "The data from our first 2 years is compelling," she noted, directing the board's attention to the charts displayed on the screen. 83% of our families have transitioned to stable housing within 9 months. 67% have increased their income through employment or benefits. 91% of the children have shown improved academic performance. Board member Eleanor Chen, a retired social worker who had become something of a mentor, to Rachel nodded approvingly. "Numbers that any similar program would envy. What do you attribute the success to, Rachel?" Rachel considered the question carefully before answering. "I think it's a combination of factors. The physical environment that preserves dignity, the comprehensive support services, the community atmosphere that combats isolation. But most fundamentally, I believe it's that we approach our residents as partners in their own recovery rather than as problems to be solved." As the meeting continued, covering budget projections and funding strategies, Rachel found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The daily humiliations of her former circumstances, the sweaty arrivals at the cafe, the mockery of co-workers, the constant anxiety about her grandchildren's welfare, had been transformed into a deep well of empathy and insight that now informed every aspect of New Horizons' approach. Jason, who served as board chair while continuing to run Second Chance Construction, caught her eye from across the table and offered a small, knowing smile. They both recognized the symmetry of their shared story, how his moment of need and her simple kindness decades ago had circled back to become her moment of need, and his intervention, which had now expanded into an organization helping hundreds of others. After the meeting adjourned, Jason lingered as the other board members gathered their belongings and headed out. "I have some news," he said once they were alone. "Remember Wendell from the cafe?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, surprised by the mention of her former supervisor. "How could I forget? Has he taken up philanthropy?" Jason laughed. "Not exactly. But he's lost his job. The cafe is closing, being converted into an upscale restaurant by new owners. I heard about it through one of our contractors who's handling the renovation." "That's unfortunate for him," Rachel said carefully, trying to find the appropriate response. She felt no pleasure in Wendell's misfortune, despite his past cruelty. "It is," Jason agreed, "which is why I thought you might want to know that we're hiring for the maintenance team at the San Diego facility. Entry-level position, but solid pay, benefits, opportunity for advancement through our training program." Rachel stared at him, understanding dawning. "You want to offer Wendell a job?" Jason shrugged. "I thought you might want to. Full circle and all that. But it's entirely your call. I know he wasn't kind to you." For a moment, Rachel was transported. Back to those difficult mornings at the cafe, the whispered comments, the exaggerated wrinkled noses, the deliberate humiliations. Then she thought of Jason, recognizing her after 20 years, choosing to help rather than simply reminisce about a past kindness. "Give me his contact information," she decided. "I'll reach out myself." The conversation with Wendell was awkward, at first. His shock at hearing from her, his embarrassment when she referenced their shared past at the cafe, his clear discomfort when she explained her current position. "I don't need charity," he said stiffly, when she mentioned the job opening. "Ursing Dieber, especially not from, it's not charity," Rachel replied evenly. "It's an employment opportunity with an organization that believes in second chances. Your customer service experience is actually valuable, even if your management style could use some refinement." There was a long pause before Wendell responded, his voice quieter. "Why would you help me? I wasn't good to you." Rachel considered her answer carefully. Because kindness isn't conditional on someone deserving it. Sometimes it's most powerful precisely when it's unexpected. Whether Wendell would accept the position remained to be seen, but extending the offer had brought Rachel a sense of completion, another loop closed in the ongoing story of interconnected lives and moments of choice. That evening, Rachel arrived home to find Lily at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures. At 14, her granddaughter was already thinking about higher education, a future that would have seemed impossible during their days of bare survival. UCLA has an amazing social work program, Lily announced without preamble, and they have scholarships specifically for students who've experienced homelessness or housing insecurity. Rachel set down her bag, smiling at her granddaughter's enthusiasm. That sounds perfect for you, though you have plenty of time to decide. Marcus burst in from his bedroom, waving a paper. Grandma, I got an A on my science project. Ms. Hernandez says I should enter it in the district science fair. Rachel gathered both children into a hug, overwhelmed for a moment by the ordinary extraordinariness of their lives now. Homework and grades, college dreams and science projects, the simple security of knowing where they would sleep each night, what they would eat, how they would warm themselves when it was cold. I'm so proud of you both, she said softly, so incredibly proud. Later, after dinner and homework and the evening routines that had become comfortingly familiar, Rachel stood once more on the small balcony of their apartment. The city lights spread before her, a tapestry of countless lives, each with its own story of struggle and resilience, defeat and triumph. Somewhere out there were people like her former self, walking long distances to thankless jobs, enduring daily indignities, fighting to maintain hope in circumstances that seemed designed to extinguish it. And somewhere too were people like Jason, whose position and resources allowed them to make meaningful interventions, to change the trajectory of lives with acts of recognition and support. New Horizons stood at the intersection of these realities, creating pathways between them, building bridges over the chasms of circumstance that separated human beings from one another and from their own potential. Rachel's journey from sweaty, mocked waitress to respected executive director hadn't erased the systemic problems that created homelessness and poverty. But it had demonstrated that individual stories could shift, that cycles could be broken, that compassion organized into action could create ripples of transformation, extending far beyond a single life or family. As she turned to go inside, Rachel caught sight of her reflection in the glass door, no longer trying to make herself small or invisible, no longer weighed down by shame or desperation. The woman who looked back at her stood straight, her eyes clear and purposeful, her presence firmly anchored in a life of meaning and contribution. From the kitchen came the sounds of Lily and Marcus cleaning up from dinner, their voices raised in friendly disagreement about whose turn it was to take out the recycling. Ordinary sounds, precious sounds. Rachel smiled, stepping back inside. To join them, to continue the everyday miracle of their reclaimed lives. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.